But let's talk now to Miriam Cates MP, Conservative and Education Select Committee member, because this morning on the front pages of the papers, particularly the Times today, legal fears over gender guidance for schools. Rishi Sunak is expected to delay, we understand, trans guidance for schools after the Attorney General and government lawyers warned that plans to strengthen it might be unlawful, or possibly would be unlawful. This was when previously Rishi Sunak said, I'm going to make sure that parents are told if children of theirs are in any way asking questions about their gender, and particularly if they're asking if they can change it. Miriam, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Mike.
I mean, we knew that that there might be a bit of opposition, I suppose, to this plan by Rishi Sunak, but has this kind of put him off altogether? What do you make of it?
No, I think probably the opposite. I mean, of course, it is frustrating that it has been delayed, because there is a very serious situation going on in schools at the moment where more and more children are being told that they can change gender, being encouraged to change gender or allowed to change gender, with all the safeguarding risks that brings. And of course, it's a hugely difficult situation for teachers as well, who don't know how they're supposed to respond to this lawfully, compassionately, you know, when it's well outside of their remit of teaching and learning. So we do need this guidance, but it's much more important that it's correct and it's right, both legally and morally, than it is that it comes quickly. And it sounds as though the government has reached the position where if they were to say to schools, no, you can't change a child's gender, you have to call a boy he and him, then they're not sure whether that is lawful. Now, that's quite extraordinary in a way, that to use the English language in the way it's supposed to be used could be unlawful. And I don't know that it necessarily is. I do think there is a way through, but they're clearly prepared to legislate if they have to. And I think that's a very positive step forward. Yes, there's going to be a delay, but actually if we're acknowledging that schools shouldn't be transitioning children, that is a step forward.
Well, yeah, because if government lawyers and the Attorney General are saying that this might be unlawful, then presumably the law must have changed at some point or other before anybody ever spoke about this kind of nonsense.
Well, I think what's happening here is there's some confusion about the Equality Act, how it applies in school, and what the protected characteristic of gender reassignment really means. So, as your listeners will know, the Equality Act defines these 8 or 9, I think, characteristics that you can have as a human being and that you must not be discriminated against for having. So, for example, disability, your age, your sex, your religion, all those things, absolutely, we shouldn't be discriminating against people on that basis. But the gender reassignment characteristic is a little bit different, because essentially you can say that you have this protected characteristic just by saying, well, at some point I might change my gender. You don't have to do anything about it. Just by saying that, just by thinking that, you have that characteristic. So the question is, do children who want to change gender have that characteristic? Well, probably they do. But I don't think treating them as boys and girls, just the same as all other boys and girls, is discrimination, because it's not discriminating against them on the basis of their beliefs about their gender. It's discriminating on the basis of their sex, which everybody has, male or female. So I am not a lawyer, so I don't know what the advice is. And obviously the Attorney General's advice is always private and it shouldn't have been leaked. But clearly there are some questions to answer here, and they've got to get to a point where they're legally satisfied. I understand that, but I don't see why it should be unlawful to use the correct pronouns.
No, exactly right. Because also the other question, I suppose, that arises from all of this is that, you know, if you're going to argue that these people have to be protected in some way from the kind of speech that might offend them, then you're kind of going down a very dangerous road, are you not? Because we've already found, in fact, that it is not unlawful to cause offence, and if people take offence, that's not against the law.
Absolutely, and we certainly shouldn't be raising children with the idea that they're never going to hear anything offensive or difficult. And of course, schools should be places where children are treated sensitively and with compassion and safeguarding. But at the moment, the problem is that these children are not being safeguarded. Often these children have got other issues like ADHD, autism, trauma, being bullied. Huge proportion of these children are looked after children. They don't live with their birth parents who could protect them. And actually, they're being completely taken out of safeguarding by teachers and schools just agreeing and say, OK, yes, all your problems are the result of actually you've been born in the wrong body, which is happening in schools. And they're then being excluded from the kind of safeguarding procedures that they ought to be entitled to. So at the moment we have what is really a safeguarding disaster, a bit of a Wild West. And we absolutely need the government to bring forward guidance that's backed up with law that will allow teachers to do, their job properly without worrying about this. And there's a really interesting piece that's been published today by a mother of a trans-identified child on the CAPEX website that just goes through exactly what their family has been through and how the school hid from them what was happening. Really, really frightening stuff to read as a parent. And this, I'm afraid, is happening in a lot of schools, and this is why we need the guidance.
Yes. And do you think a lot of this is down to a piece you wrote about yesterday and this kind of elite overproduction of people coming out of university with this kind of woke ideology that's been implanted in them really since they were at school, and suddenly now we've got those kinds of people maybe doing sort of leadership type jobs in all manner of different places like education and elsewhere. Coutts Bank, for example, where, suddenly people are taking the view that, oh, well, I don't like your politics, so therefore I'm going to sort of excommunicate you effectively.
Well, I do think the mass expansion of higher education does have something to do with this. And I think that's a lot of these ideas, gender ideology, critical race theory, have come from American academia. And they're an export, if you like. They've come over to British universities and, around the Western world. And, huge numbers of young people go through universities. Obviously, they're in quite a kind of an artificial group, I suppose, of just people of their own age, just people from a similar background. And they are being taught these ideas. We know that. We've got lots of examples from universities of these ideas being very heavily pushed. We've seen what happened to Professor Kathleen Stock when she took a different view. And so we know that's happening. And of course, young people go through university, they then go into the professional world, and teaching is included. And it does seem to me that it's got to the point where this is almost seen as just reality and normal now in certain groups of people, that of course you can change gender, of course you can be whatever gender you like. But of course that's an anti-reality point of view. But if enough people around you think like that, why would you challenge it? So we've got a big job on our hands, because legislation isn't going to change people's minds. It might protect children, and that's very important. But we need to find a way to row back on some of these very anti-reality ideas that are quite socially damaging.
Because it seems to have happened quite quickly. I mean, I've been around a bit longer than you, and I don't remember ever having a sort of period of time quite as bad as this, where, you read stories in the papers and you just go, what? I mean, the idea that Nigel Farage has been kicked off the Coutts banking list as customer because he's friends with Novak Djokovic, a world-renowned tennis player and champion, and Donald Trump, former president of the United States of America. But apparently those are two people that are non-people, according to Coutts Bank. It's incredible.
It is. It's almost like the ideas of what is moral in a public sense has been flipped on its head in the last 10 or 20 years. And 20 years ago, the idea that a bank account would shut down someone's account because they don't agree with their political views would be absurd. But now clearly these big corporations think it's the moral thing to do. It's the right thing to cancel people with views that are problematic. And that's quite a significant turnaround. And I think, as I said, I'm sure, universities have got something to do with that. But also we do need to look at some of the legislation that was brought in by the Blair government, particularly the Equality Act, actually, which has this public sector equality duty, which essentially makes public sector organisation into culture warriors. It's their job now to push some of these ideas, or they think it is. I don't know whether that's actually the case in the law. And some of this legislation that's brought in with good intentions to stop people being discriminated against, who would disagree with that, has actually had some fairly serious unintended consequences in the way that it's turned our neutral organisations political, and that can't be good for anybody.
No, it really can't. Just one final thing before we let you go, Miriam. Apparently, breaking news today, 574 people were detected crossing the Channel in small boats on Tuesday, the second highest number on a single day so far this year. Rishi Sunak, who's currently got the lowest approval rating that he's ever had since he's been in Downing Street, still says that just stopping the boats is one of his 5 aims. I mean, he's not doing it, is he?
It's certainly not turned around as much as we want, but nobody has done more practically or in legislation to turn this situation around than the Prime Minister. And OK, I absolutely agree this hasn't happened yet, but we had the illegal migration bill reached its final stages this week. We had these, mega voting sessions to defeat the Lord's attempts to defeat the bill, which was happen successfully. And of course, we've got to wait for this Supreme Court judgment on whether or not the planes can go to Rwanda. That'll be later this year. So yes, it's not happening quickly enough, but there really is nothing more that the Prime Minister could be doing right now. What we need is for the law to go through, for the planes to leave for Rwanda, then we'll have the deterrent that we need. And I am pretty confident that once that deterrent's in place, we will start to see a change. Because essentially what's happening is there are these criminal gangs all the way around the world that see Britain as a weak spot, that see our laws as a weak spot. It's easy to come here, it's easy to stay. Once we change that perception, I think it will be turned around very quickly. And I appreciate your viewers want to see it happen more quickly, but we've got to work within the law. And we are doing everything we can within the law to turn the situation around.
OK. And certainly something that the viewers are saying to me, and I've said today, is that I know that this is something that comes up every year, and I'm not trying to make you work until you drop. But, you know, people look at MPs and Westminster shutting down in July and not coming back really until sort of end of September, beginning of October. Is there no way that Westminster could sort of function through the summer months, the 8 or 9 weeks that it shuts down for?
Well, I think a lot of that time in the summer is spent doing really important things in the constituency that you don't have chance to do for the rest of the year, because most MPs, they travel down to London on a Sunday night or early Monday morning. They don't go home till Thursday night. Sometimes we can go home Wednesday night, but Thursday night. You get Friday and Saturday in your constituency, and you think all the things that the constituents want you to do, all the meetings they want you to go to, all the events you want to be seen at, all the surgeries you run, all the things that you help people with. 1 day a week or 1.5 days a week is not very much to be in your constituency. So actually those summer weeks are a really important time for doing those things that you just don't have a chance to do. And also MPs do work very hard, the vast majority, and we do need a break. And obviously we can't just take time off at any point during the legislative term. It's a bit like at school, you have to all break together, otherwise it wouldn't work. So that's my defence of MPs.
Very well said. Thank you, Miriam.